What's poppin', players? Today we got to talk about the resurgence of Kemba Walker, aka Kemba needs a Walker, like I used to joke on the podcast. But in all seriousness, we have to put some respect on this man's name for what he has done to put himself back into the conversation for the New York Knicks. He went from 9 straight DNPs to an Eastern Conference Player of the Week. And before we get into all of the nitty-gritty details on this subject, I want to say first, make sure that you like this video and subscribe to the channel and help me meet my goal of 500 subscribers. Let's do it. Look, Kemba Walker signed a 2-year deal in the offseason to play for his childhood team, the New York Knicks, and everything was supposed to look storybook. However, things turned south very quickly due to poor defensive play, which shouldn't be a surprise to many people, especially the last couple years with Kemba Walker, but also not being able to be efficient or effective on the offensive end. And he had career lows in points, rebounds, assists, and Kemba quickly found himself glued to the bench for the New York Knicks. An NBA agent even went on the record saying, when you think about it, and all of the hype, it is a catastrophe. And everybody knows Tom Thibodeau. He's a really defensive focused coach. Since his time in Chicago, he runs players hard. He does not accept defensive lapses, especially if you're not able to offer something on the other end that would be able to kind of give back. And that's where Kemba Walker found himself. And the only way he got back into the rotation was basically because they had no other guards available on the team. D-Rose hurt his ankle, had surgery, is gone for 2+ months. They had Emmanuel Quickly on the COVID-19 list amongst other players that were ahead of him on the depth chart. And Kemba finally got his chance to play. And of course, after having the game taken away from him for quite some time, he decided to come out on fire. He made the most of this opportunity, putting together a 3-game stretch that he has not had in years. Had a 29-point game, a 21-point game, and a whopping 44-point game before capping it off on Christmas by having the first triple-double by a New York Knick on Christmas Day. And that was huge. Granted, they did play the Hawks, who didn't have Trae Young, and the Hawks have already been struggling quite a bit this year, but it's still a massive win for Kemba. He still played fantastic, having his best plus-minus of the season at +19, and having only his 3rd triple-double in his illustrious career. Why did this happen? How did Walker go from a guy who couldn't find himself off the bench to a guy who was exploding on the scene? Comes down to one word: aggression. Kemba Walker became aggressive, taking it to the cup, controlling the flow of the game, not being over aggressive in which he was trying to force his shot, but more so breaking down defenses with what they give and acting like he was that 4-time All-Star on the court that the New York Knicks wanted. He started off the season deferring too much to other players, trying to find his place to fit in on this roster, and it ended up finding him no place on this roster. And Kemba Walker even talked about this, how he had to switch his mindset and how that time on the bench for him was actually a blessing because it made him step back, think about it, and change. Now Kemba Walker, over his games back with the New York Knicks, off the bench is averaging 26 points, 8+ rebounds, and 7 assists. So Kemba Walker is back. What does that really mean? Are we talking about Charlotte Kemba? Let's be real honest. I don't think that's where we are. Are we talking about Boston Kemba? Can Kemba be better than he was in Boston? Because that's really the hope. Because after a lot of tough years for Kemba, dealing with knee issues, people have really written him off. And you could tell by the level of deal that he got with the New York Knicks that they value him and thought he could be something. And with D-Rose sidelined for a significant period of time, he actually seems to be in a good spot to try to carve out a real role here. But it's always going to be limited. It might not actually extend to the end points of games, especially when D-Rose is back, because of his consistent defensive deficiencies and Tom Thibodeau's focus on defense. Now look, that 44-point explosion was his first 40-point game since January of 2020. So Kemba was really on that. An entire 2 years since he's exploded like that as a player. And that might not be saying a lot, considering his issues staying healthy in Boston and having to also defer in Boston without really much of a choice because of the two significantly more prolific scorers that they had in Tatum and Brown. But the lack of a Tatum and Brown and the addition of a more inside scoring presence, which Boston has lacked for years now, hence why they went back for Al Horford after letting him go to Philly. Kemba should be able to become that offensive juggernaut that he was in Charlotte, because that's really what the Knicks need. They need scoring. They need people that can score on multiple levels and that versatility. Defense is usually always going to be what's there, and you can always pair him with a larger guard like Alec Burks on the floor to try to make up for some of the defense that he lacks. But the concern is always going to be when Kemba isn't putting up numbers or prolifically running this offense, is going to be very hard for Tibbs to justify to himself to keep Kemba on the floor. And that's going to be a big problem going forward. But I'm like super happy to see Kemba really making it back. Now, it's not like after those 3 games, he only scored 10 points in each of his last 2 games. So the scoring has dipped off a little bit, which is something that I'm saying is actually a worry. But for now, the Knicks don't seem like they have much of a choice. But I wouldn't be surprised if we see more stretches of the season where Kemba finds himself on the outs of the rotation, especially when they get all their bodies back. But this seems like it's a good 2-year spot for Kemba. This probably erases some of his names from the trade rumors that were out there when the long stretch of DMPs were happening. But let me know what you all think. Is Kemba really back? Is it going to happen? Is it going to stay? And does he flourish in his hometown in New York? Thanks for stopping by. If you enjoyed this video, make sure to drop a like, leave a subscribe so you don't miss any of our content.